The Women's World Cup is about to start, and I'm going to assume that you know about a couple of the teams. But chances are you don't know about most of the teams, or specifically, you don't know when they're good or why they're good. That is why we do team maps, because it helps you learn almost straight away what teams can do and what teams can't do. Plus, we like the way they look when they all jumble together. In fact, we like the way they look when they're all separate as well. If you love cricket on a deep spiritual level and want to be involved when no matches are being played, we have the game for you. Hit Wicket is so good that Harsha Bogle and me have backed it. And that's a lot of nerd energy behind one game. This is a strategic game of cricket, and it's not just about whacking your screen really hard with your finger. This isn't a game where you swipe all around to try and hit the ball. You work out what works best based on real-life cricket situations. For instance, dot balls bring pressure, ones and twos lead to fours. There is no way you can just hit a six every ball or take wickets all the time. This is proper cricket, yet it still has some special gaming powers in there as well. And so this game is about playing, but also building and managing your team. You are the batter, bowler, owner, coach, captain. It's your dream, right? And there are no ads, it's just cricket. Download Hit Wicket now and bring out the cricket legend in you, because Hit Wicket is a cricket game made for you and supported by other cricket nerds. Stick it in your pocket today. This was made using MV Players Insights. The same technology that supports the England and New Zealand Test players is available to club cricketers as well. A very quick explanation if this is the first time you've ever been to a team map and this looks all a little bit confusing. Essentially here you'll see we've got batting on this side and we have bowling on this side. And these are ratings because obviously specifically in T20 cricket it's not just about averages and it's not just about strike rates at certain parts of the game. So we weight them based on our own algorithms and we work out if a team is really good in the batting power play or, I don't know, really poor in the batting power play. From that we get to see a shape. So in some of these teams you'll see that they're very good at batting or bowling, but maybe not both. Or maybe they're very good at batting at the death and bowling in the power play, but not very good for the rest of the game. That is what the team maps tell us. Now, usually at this point, I would separate out the first couple of teams and show you some things. But I think you can actually see here, there's one team that's quite noticeable. Let's just call them Australia, because even with all the other teams here, you could see just how dominant they are at pretty much every single facet of the game. So if we separate out all the teams, look at the size of them compared to all the other teams here. And remember, Australia don't play a lot of poor T20 sides either. This is them playing the best teams in the world and still being absolutely dominant. Like if we take out a bunch of the other teams here and we just look at, I don't know, two random ones. Let's say we look at Australia and Bangladesh and we combine them for a moment. Poor Bangladesh, they're playing a different sport than the Australian women's team is. But that is very unfair. So let's take Bangladesh away here. You can see here, this is when you're par. They are above par in everything. And specifically, I would say that when you really look at this closely, you'll notice they're a bit more of a batting side, right? They are 27% better than other teams when they bat in the power play. They are 26% better when they bat in the middle, and they are 27% when they are batting at the death. Their bowling is not as good. I mean, it's still pretty good, but it's not as good. They're 17% better at the starts of the innings, 16% in the middle, and then when they get to the death, they're 20% better. So they do pick up. But there's no doubt that Australia is a batting team. They are also absolutely awesome. I was a little bit surprised that they haven't dominated as much with bowling, but I do think that gives maybe a couple of the other favorites, England and India, a bit of a chance because I like their bowling lineups. But let's bring Bangladesh back up. We can't do that. That's just unfair again, isn't it? Let's have a look at Bangladesh. Well, it's pretty noticeable here that Bangladesh are nowhere near a par batting side. This is quite poor here. They're like 19 and 27 and 23% worse than other par batting lineups in the games they've gone up against. However, if you look at their bowling, once they get to the middle, their spinners start to pick up just a little bit there. They're only 10% worse than par, and they're not too bad in the death either. But you can see here, essentially, there are 4 parts of the game that the Bangladesh women are not very good at, and then there are 2 parts of the game that they actually start to approach par. So if they're in a game, maybe they've made enough runs or whatever the situation is, and then they get to a point where they've got through the power play, this is the time you would expect them to put pressure on other teams. Again, we're being very unfair with Bangladesh by doing this, but the England team is also a very, very good side. But you will notice that, again, another batting team, very much like Australia here. In the batting power play, they're about 20% better, but it's the batting middle overs where I think Siva Brunt specifically is really, really important here. She just destroys teams, and they are 34% better. So at this particular skill, they are better than Australia than anything else, and that holds to the end. But you will see here that for an England team, they're not particularly good with the new ball. They're holding around par, and you can see at the death as well, England not particularly good. What I like is the middle bit, which I'm going to say is the Sophie Ecclestone effect. But of course, Sarah Glenn and Ecclestone probably pairing together in this point. But they are brilliant at bowling spin in the middle. This is really their only strength in that part of the game. So they're obviously a very good team. I think they're third favourites for the tournament at the moment, but essentially they might be the best middle overs team when you have a look at the batting and then the bowling all together. And we've got the second favourite of the tournament here, and I'll just leave this up for a minute because this is a little bit more fair because these teams are quite level here. You could see that India's batting is pretty much exactly the same as England's, if not slightly better, or certainly around that point, except for the fact that the middle overs, they go away. What is really interesting is just how much better England is as bowling in those middle overs compared to India. But let's take England away for a minute. Based on this, I have India down as another batting team, and the power play, I think, is their absolute strength here. They're 23% better in the power play, and it holds firm all the way through, but they're not spectacular. Where I really like them then is with the ball. So if they can bat first and outbat teams and then start very well with the new ball, I think they're in a good position. But they're not great death bowlers, and they're not bowling particularly well in the middle. So it really is batting first, making a lot of runs, and trying to take a couple of quick wickets might be the way that India can do very well. But I still think overall, if we compare them to England and Australia, there isn't much between these teams over the last couple of years, and that's when we've got this data from, compared to historically, where quite often Australia was just miles ahead of everyone else. These are your three favourites. Australia deserve to be the short price favourite, of course, India just behind them, and England not far away. I might have England maybe slightly higher as second favourite over India, but I don't think there's much between any of those sides. Traditionally, the other really good side would be New Zealand, and we have to take Australia away because that's not fair. And let's take England away, and yeah, let's take them all away. The interesting thing with New Zealand is how steady they are. Like, what is their strength looking at this? I would almost argue that they don't have one, right? They are just a par team all the way through. And I think, to be fair, that's slightly better than where I thought they would be, because having watched them over the last couple of years, I've thought they've really been slipping off. But the issue is, how do they put pressure on those better sides? Because they don't have a particular part of the game where they're very good. They have maybe 3 or 4 players who I think are still very good, and everyone else I have a lot of question marks over. Unless some players come from absolutely nowhere, I can't see New Zealand being particularly good here. And if we compare them to Pakistan, now, sometimes you have to be careful with team maps, especially in international cricket, because these teams don't all play the same sides over and over again. We get that, that is fine. But even so, Pakistan were not a strong team for a very long time, and you can see that they match up pretty well against New Zealand, who of course have been a very strong team. I suppose looking at this, we'd say that Pakistan maybe leans slightly towards a batting team. But essentially, they start their innings really good. They're actually above par. And then unfortunately, it completely drops off in the middle. During the series against England, they put themselves into so many great positions batting early on, and then they would make no runs because of all the wickets they would lose in the middle. At the deaths, they're okay if they can hold any wickets in hand, but once they're about 4 wickets down or 5 wickets down, it gets really dicey for them quite fast. But we can see over here with the bowling, they have a lot of issues. Again, as a new ball team, they're not too bad. Once they get to the middle, they don't really constrain anyone all that much. And then when they get to the death, if you have any wickets in hand against Pakistan at the death, you should be able to score masses of runs against them. Remember though, of recent times, they did very well against a South African team, and I thought they played well against England. They just kept shooting themselves in the foot by losing too many wickets. Let's compare them to Scotland. Remember that Scotland might look better here, but you have to factor in the opponents, and Pakistan have obviously played a higher level of opponent between the two. But what this does show you is that Scotland definitely has some massive strengths, and I think that's really what we wanted to have a look at here. Let's just start with the strength here. Their bowling in the power play is incredible. They're 18% better than what we would expect in those games, and a lot of that comes down to Catherine Bryce, who I think has, I don't know, something like 20 or 25 wickets in the bowling power play at a bowling average of like 8. And she's not the only one. There are other bowlers that Scotland have had. Perhaps some of this has been feasting on pretty poor batting lineups in some of the games that they play. But I can promise you, I've seen Katherine Bryce. She is a legit T20 player. And so some of this is honest, and she will definitely trouble some teams. The problem is that is basically what Scotland have available to them. If you look here, they start badly with the bat. They are very good in the middle, and then it drops off. They're not a particularly great batting lineup. And outside of that bowling power play, they struggle in the middle, and they're not really all that much better at the death, although there's a bit of a kick up here. If they are going to beat teams, I'm going to assume it's going to be them bowling first, Katherine Bryce and all the other bowlers taking a bunch of wickets and keeping some pressure on. They shouldn't win many games, but they might actually put a lot of pressure on some top orders. Let's see them compared to South Africa, who's obviously going through a bit of a rebuilding position themselves. They're a bit more of an even team here, but very good with the new ball. You can see here that with their batting, they're 12% better than par when they're batting against the new ball, and they are even better when they are bowling at 14% better than par. Everything else is more or less around par. There's nothing all that special about their team. I'm actually shocked that they've done well bowling at the death, because I feel like every time I see them bowling at the death, they're not doing particularly well, but they're holding in there. I would say, having watched them over the last little while and the retirements and maybe some of their players aging out, they're no longer in that area where I would compare them to the top 3 favourites in this tournament. They're probably better than New Zealand, but I think a lot would have to go right for them to be a legitimate title hope here. And looking at this, I don't see it. But they should get good starts to their game. So if they get good starts against some of the better teams, they're a big chance. Let's compare them to Sri Lanka. And I suppose the big difference between them and Sri Lanka is we expect Sri Lanka to be slightly better in the UAE conditions, right? The pitches are going to spin. It's going to help them a little bit more. And Sri Lanka is overall just a slightly above par team. They're quite level here. They get a bit of a kick with their death batting, but realistically, they're around par all the way through, and then they get a slight kick at the end, nothing all that special. They can bowl all the way through the game, maybe not great, particularly at the death, but there's nothing that exciting here again. But you can't see Chamari Atapatu on this, of course, and she can make what is a very normal team look a lot better at times, and the conditions should help her. And if you compare them to the West Indies, who have obviously had a lot more success in women's cricket than Sri Lanka has, you'd say at the moment Sri Lanka is certainly playing the better cricket there. The West Indies team has been ravaged by retirements. It's basically at times been Hayley Matthews on her own, and she can only do so much. But if we have a look here, they're okay at batting in the middle. They've been pretty poor at everything else. I'm hoping that they can provide some upsets and actually cause a little bit more interest throughout the tournament. But looking at this, I'm not massively keen on the West Indies as a side. The West Indies is in Group B, and they have South Africa with them. They also have Scotland, and they have England and Bangladesh. I mean, this doesn't really help us, but those are all the teams in Group B. If we put it like this, you'll see that only one of the favourites is in, which allows for the West Indies or South Africa or Bangladesh to have a very good early part of the tournament. More likely looking at this, I would say South Africa, but also, I don't know, if Katherine Bryce can take some more wickets and the rest of the new ball bowlers for Scotland do some damage, maybe there's something that Scotland can do here, but I would assume that England is going to coast through. If I'm England, India, or Australia, this is the group I want to be in, and so England have done very well to be in this one. And this is Group A, which does show you just Australia's looming shadow, because you definitely have to go through Australia here. This is going to be tough for the teams. I actually think maybe all things considered, this is a slightly stronger group from 1 through to 5 as well. So it isn't just that it's tough at the top. It's tough all the way through. New Zealand are still not pushovers, and they have world-class players. I think Pakistan have played some very good cricket of late, and Chamari Atapatu is from Sri Lanka. But obviously, it's going to be very hard for these 3 teams just because, you know, I mean, just this in general, this doesn't help either, right? Like, a lot is going to have to go right for probably Sri Lanka or New Zealand to have a good tournament. I mean, when it comes down to it, Australia is still the team to beat in women's cricket, and there's nothing that I've looked at here that really changes that at all. I think England, because of Sophie Ecclestone and Sarah Glenn, have a very good chance as well, and I like India's overall team. Those are the three to beat, so maybe the most interesting thing is who the other semi-finalist is and whether they can assemble a team enough to beat everyone else. But when it comes down to it, when we think of women's cricket, we think of the Australian team. They should be favourites, but I think England and India have a good chance as well. I have a book out with Abhishek Mukherjee, and it is called Overthrowing Cricket's Empire. And it's about the stories of how each team beat England for the first time. We go all the way back to the demon Fred Spofforth getting annoyed at W.G. Grace for acting a little bit like Alex Carey. And then we come all the way to present times with Rashid Khan's England's redemption. We cover every single team to beat England in a major international, but we also talk about the incredible stories like the barefoot basher from Fiji that almost played for New Zealand. In fact, this book is full of tales like that, like how Pakistan lost a top batter after he was on the run from an angry husband of a movie star he was having an affair with, and also how one future captain of his nation realised he might have to go out and bat at Lords and that he didn't own his own pads. Cricket was used as a tool by the Empire, but what happens when those nations grow up and get good at it? Find Overthrowing Cricket's Empire on Amazon today.